Welcome to the Deep Dive. If you're tuning in, you're probably someone who, like us, isn't afraid to tackle some really complex, sometimes quite controversial topics. And today we're definitely heading into one of those. We're looking at Santhara, also known as Sallekhana.
Right.
It's this ancient Jain practice of voluntarily fasting, fasting until death. And recent events, particularly a case involving a very young child in Indore, have really pushed it into the spotlight.
Absolutely. It's fascinating and quite confronting how this deeply spiritual ancient practice now intersects with huge contemporary issues, religious freedom, child protection, how we think about dignity in life and death.
So our mission today in this deep dive is really to try and understand Santhara better, look at its history, what it means within Jainism, the legal battles, the ethical debates.
Yeah, to get a clearer picture amidst all the noise, we'll be drawing on various perspectives and sources to sort of piece it all together.
Okay, great. So let's start with the basics. Santhara, Sallekhana. What is it, fundamentally?
Okay, so Santhara, or Sallekhana, is fundamentally a Jain ritual. It involves a voluntary fast that continues until death. It's primarily associated with the Shwetambar sect, which is one of the two major branches of Jainism.
And the purpose? Is it just about ending life?
No, not really. The core purpose is seen as spiritual. It's about purification, achieving liberation or moksha by consciously detaching from worldly desires, attachments, even the needs of the physical body itself.
Right, so it's framed very differently from, say, suicide driven by despair.
Exactly. That's a critical distinction in the Jain view. Santhara is understood as a peaceful, highly considered renunciation. It's meant to be undertaken with full awareness, contemplation, and a clear spiritual goal. It's not seen as an act of violence or negativity.
That context is crucial, and you mentioned that it's ancient. This isn't something new.
Oh, not at all. It has very deep roots. You find references in key ancient Jain texts, like the Tattvartha Sutra, which kind of lays out the code of conduct for Jains.
And how does it fit with core Jain beliefs, like nonviolence?
Well, that's really interesting. It connects directly to core principles. Ahimsa, or nonviolence, is paramount in Jainism, as you know. And within the tradition, Santhara is actually viewed by many as the ultimate act of nonviolence towards the self.
How so?
Because it's a gradual, mindful cessation of bodily functions without any aggression. It also strongly reflects a parigraha, the principle of non-attachment.
The ultimate letting go.
Precisely. Letting go of all earthly ties, including the body itself. Traditionally, it wasn't undertaken lightly. It was usually in specific situations like very old age, terminal illness where there's no hope of recovery, or just a profound sense of spiritual readiness.
So monks, devout followers.
Yes, historically it's been practiced by both monastics and dedicated lay Jains who felt they met those conditions.
Okay, that gives us a really good sense of the historical and religious background. But let's turn to the present day, because the recent case in Indore really ignited the current debate. What happened there?
Right. So very recently, the case involved a 3-year-old girl named Viana Jain in Indore, Madhya Pradesh. She reportedly undertook Santhara.
A 3-year-old?
Yes. And tragically, she had been diagnosed with a terminal brain tumor. The fact that a child so young was involved immediately sparked, significant controversy and concern.
You can absolutely see why. Making that kind of decision for a 3-year-old. The question of voluntariness just jumps out.
Exactly. The public reaction was strong. Child rights organizations got involved, raising serious questions about the child's fundamental rights. The core issue became, could a child that age possibly give conscious, voluntary consent to undertake a practice that ends life?
I assume this led to some official scrutiny.
It did. The Madhya Pradesh State Commission for Protection of Child Rights, the MPSC-PCR, they took notice. They issued notices, inquiries to the parents and also to the religious leaders who were reportedly involved. It really brought that tension to the forefront, the clash between religious practices and the state's duty to protect children.
And this feeds directly into the legal situation, which, as I understand it, has been pretty complicated for a while now.
Very much so. A key moment was back in 2015. The Rajasthan High Court delivered a major ruling. It declared Santhara illegal.
On what grounds?
The court essentially equated it with abetment of suicide, citing sections 306 and 309 of the Indian Penal Code. So legally, it was framed as assisting suicide.
Wow. That must have caused a huge reaction in the Jain community.
It absolutely did. There was significant backlash. The community argued that the ruling violated their fundamental right to freedom of religion, which is guaranteed under Article 25 of the Indian Constitution.
They see it as integral to their faith.
Exactly. And they also brought up Article 21, the right to life with dignity, suggesting that for someone facing, say, a terminal illness, choosing this path aligned with their religious beliefs should be seen as part of that right to dignity.
So where did it go from the High Court ruling?
The case went up to the Supreme Court of India. Recognizing the complexity, the religious sensitivities, the Supreme Court put a stay on the Rajasthan High Court's decision.
A stay meaning?
Meaning the High Court's ban was effectively paused, suspended. This created, well, a kind of legal limbo. The practice wasn't explicitly legal, but the ban wasn't in effect either.
So where does that leave things now, legally speaking?
Well, the Supreme Court hasn't yet given a final verdict, so as of today, the practice continues under this sort of legal uncertainty. Its ultimate status hinges on that final Supreme Court decision whenever it comes.
Okay, so with that complex legal picture in mind, let's dig into the argument supporting Santhara. Why do its proponents defend it so strongly?
Well, the primary argument, as we touched on, is religious freedom. They stress that within Jainism, this isn't suicide. It's a deeply spiritual act, sanctioned by their religion, undertaken with understanding. It's part of their essential religious practice.
Is it only about religion, though?
Not entirely. There's also a strong argument around personal autonomy and dignity, especially for individuals who are terminally ill, perhaps suffering greatly. Proponents argue people should have the right to choose how their life ends, particularly if recovery isn't possible.
A right to choose with dignity.
Yes. And they also point to its history, This isn't some new invention. It's an ancient tradition deeply rooted in their scriptures and practiced for centuries.
Right.
And finally, there's the spiritual cleansing aspect. It's seen as a way to shed karma accumulated over lifetimes and attain moksha, which is the ultimate spiritual goal in Jainism, liberation from the cycle of rebirth.
Okay, those are powerful arguments from the perspective of the faithful and those supporting the practice.
Yeah.
Now let's flip the coin. What are the main arguments against Santhara?
The most fundamental argument against it revolves around the right to life. Critics often equate Santhara directly with suicide, arguing it violates this basic human right, which the state has a duty to protect.
Suicide being illegal in many contexts.
Right. Then there are very serious concerns about coercion or undue influence.
How so?
Well, the worry is that vulnerable individuals, like minors, as in the indoor case, or perhaps elderly people who might be dependent or feeling like a burden, could be pressured into it. That it might not always be a genuinely free choice.
That risk of pressure is definitely a significant ethical concern. What else?
There are broader ethical questions, too. Some question whether deliberately fasting to death, even with spiritual intent, can truly be considered a dignified end. There are also concerns about potential religious exploitation situations where the practice might be encouraged for reasons other than an individual's deep personal spiritual readiness. And crucially, coming back to cases involving children, the issue of informed consent is massive. Critics seriously question whether a young child can possibly grasp the finality and implications of such a decision.
It really lays bare the complexity, doesn't it? It's far from a simple issue with easy answers.
Absolutely. The whole Santhara debate really highlights this fundamental tension we see in many societies, the tension between the right to religious freedom and other fundamental human rights, particularly the right to life and the need to protect vulnerable people.
It forces us to ask difficult questions, like where do you draw the line? Can deeply held religious beliefs override the state's duty to protect life?
Precisely. And it also speaks to that ongoing dialogue or sometimes friction between age-old traditions and modern legal and ethical norms.
How do traditions fit into contemporary public life?
Exactly. How do we respect diverse beliefs while upholding universal human rights standards? It's a constant balancing act.
So, just to try and summarize where we've landed, Santhara is seen by Jains as this profound, peaceful, spiritual transition. A voluntary letting go aimed at purification.
From their perspective.
But recent events, especially the case involving the child, have really amplified the significant moral and legal challenges it poses.
That sums it up well. It raises huge questions about consent, vulnerability, and the limits of religious practice. The judiciary's final word, whenever it comes, will be incredibly important in trying to navigate this complex terrain.
It will be about finding that balance, won't it? Between respecting religious freedom, a constitutional right, and upholding other fundamental rights, especially for those who can't fully advocate for themselves.
Yes, a very difficult balance to strike.
Which really leaves a big question for you listening to this. When you consider all these different angles, the deep spiritual meaning for believers, the arguments about autonomy, the ancient tradition, but also the legal questions, the ethical concerns about life, dignity, and especially the protection of vulnerable individuals, how do you think society should navigate this? How do we balance protecting religious freedom with protecting the right to life? There are no easy answers here. Definitely something to keep thinking about.